Billionaire leaves his will to the gardener, and he can't believe what he reads. David Miller couldn't stop shaking. The paper in his hands seemed to weigh more than any bag of soil he'd carried in 20 years of work. Around him, the silence was so heavy that he could hear his own heart beating out of rhythm. That's when the shrill voice cut through the air like a knife. "This is absurd." Eleanor Harrison rose from her chair with such force that she nearly knocked it over. "Mr. Sterling, you need to reread this will. There must be some mistake." The lawyer, a man with glasses whom David had only ever seen from a distance a few times, cleared his throat and adjusted the papers on the table. "Mrs. Harrison, I understand the news is unexpected, but I can assure you there is no mistake. The will was notarized 5 years ago and personally reviewed by Mr. Harrison himself 6 months ago. David still hadn't fully processed what he'd just heard. Half of everything. The mansion where he'd worked since he was 25. The companies, the investments. How was this possible? Why would Mr. Harrison do something like that? This doesn't make any sense." Brandon Harrison, the eldest son, stepped forward. His hands were clenched into fists. "My father never mentioned any of this, never. And suddenly I find out that an employee is going to get half of everything my father built his entire life." I don't understand," David finally managed to speak, his voice coming out quieter than he intended. "There must have been a mistake after all. I'm just the gardener. Please, take this back." He held out the envelope to the lawyer, but his hands were shaking so badly that a few papers almost fell to the floor. Mr. Sterling made no move to take them. "Mr. Miller, Arthur Harrison Vance was very clear in his provisions. There is no mistake." Sarah, the youngest daughter, was sitting in a corner, watching everything in silence. Unlike the others, she wasn't shouting, wasn't gesturing. She just looked at David with an expression he couldn't decipher. There was something in that look that made him even more uncomfortable. Kimberly, Brandon's wife, was the next to speak up. "Eleanor, do you remember those conversations I mentioned?" she said, looking at her mother-in-law. "I used to see Mr. Harrison talking to him in the garden almost every day these past few months. Long conversations. I always thought it was strange." "See?" Brandon pointed at David. "He took advantage of my father being frail, sick, to manipulate him." "No." David felt the blood rush to his face. "I never did anything like that. Mr. Harrison was always kind to me. We always talked about the plants, about the garden. He liked spending time out there, that's all." "Kind?" Brandon let out a bitter laugh. "My father wasn't kind to employees. He was polite, proper, but he didn't have long conversations with the gardener. Unless nothing, Brandon," Mr. Sterling interrupted, his voice firm. "I'm going to clarify something important that seems to be going unnoticed. This will was registered 5 years ago. 5 years. At that time, Mr. Harrison was in perfect health, actively running his companies. Any insinuation of manipulation is not only unfounded, but impossible." The silence that followed was even heavier. David felt all eyes turned to him again, but now with a different quality. It wasn't just anger. It was something deeper, more unsettling. It was fear. "So you're saying," Eleanor spoke slowly, each word measured, "that 5 years ago my husband decided to give half of everything to the gardener, and he never mentioned it to me, to any of us." "Exactly. Why?" Eleanor's voice came out as a whisper, but laden with a pain that made even David feel a tightness in his chest. Mr. Sterling closed the folder he was holding. "That answer, Mrs. Harrison, isn't in the legal documents. Only Mr. Harrison could have answered it, and unfortunately that chance has passed. No one mentioned the word hanging in the air. No one had to. The absence of Arthur Harrison Vance was felt in every corner of that office, in the silent mansion around them, in the garden David tended with such care. "Is there anything else in the will?" Sarah asked, breaking the silence. It was the first time she had spoken since the meeting began. "Yes." Mr. Sterling opened the folder again. Mr. Harrison left individual letters for each member of the family, and one for Mr. Miller as well. He handed out the sealed envelopes. David received his with fingers that still wouldn't stop trembling. The paper was thick, of good quality, and in the center was written only, "For David." "The letters are private," the lawyer explained. Mr. Harrison asked that each of you read yours alone when you feel ready. Brandon tore open his envelope on the spot, his eyes racing across the handwritten lines. His expression shifted from anger to confusion, then to something that looked like shock. He looked up at David, and for the first time, there was uncertainty there. "Mom," he said, his voice strangely controlled, "I think you need to read your letter, now." Eleanor picked up her envelope with hands that were trembling too. When she began to read, David watched the color drain from her face. She had to sit down. Sarah opened her letter more slowly, as if she knew the contents would change something fundamental. And when her eyes met David's again, there were tears in them. "You knew?" she asked, her voice choked. "Knew what?" David was completely lost. "I don't know anything. Please, someone tell me what's going on." It was Kimberly who broke protocol. She grabbed the letter from Brandon's hands and read it aloud. "Brandon, my son, forgive me for not having the courage to say this in person. David Miller isn't just my gardener. He's my son. Your brother." David's world stopped spinning. The walls seemed to be closing in. He heard the words, but they didn't make sense. They couldn't make sense. "No," he whispered. "No, this can't be true." "Keep reading," Eleanor told Kimberly, her voice cold as ice. 45 years ago, I made a mistake that has haunted me every day since. David's mother, Martha Miller, worked at my first company. We became involved. When she found out she was expecting my child, Kimberly paused, looking at Eleanor as if asking permission to continue. "Read it," Eleanor ordered. "I had just married Eleanor. Our families had business together. A divorce, a scandal, would have destroyed everything. So I made a deal with Martha. I gave her money so she could raise the child far away in another city. I promised to take care of them from a distance, and I did, for years. But I never had the courage to meet him, to truly be his father." David felt his legs give way. He braced himself against the wall, trying to breathe. Memories began to surface, fragmented, muddled. His mother, Martha, always saying his father had left when he was a baby, that she never heard from him again. But there was something in her eyes when she said it, something David never could identify, an old sadness mixed with anger and maybe resignation. "Lies," Brandon said, but his voice lacked conviction. "This is some kind of elaborate scam. My father would never—" "Never what, Brandon?" Sarah stood up, tears streaming freely down her face. "Never have a child out of wedlock. Never hide it from us for decades." "Well, it looks like that's exactly what he did." Eleanor stood motionless as a statue. Her hands held her own letter, but she hadn't opened it yet. When he finally did it, he read in silence. David watched as several emotions crossed her face: anger, pain, betrayal, and then, surprisingly, something that seemed to be understanding. "I knew," she said at last, her voice low but clear. "Not from the beginning, but I knew." The shock on Brandon and Sarah's faces was visible. "What do you mean you knew?" Brandon nearly shouted. "I found out 15 years ago," Eleanor continued, each word coming out with difficulty. "I found old documents when we were reorganizing the office, regular bank transfers to a Martha Miller, always on the same day every month for years. I confronted your father. He told me the truth." "And you never told us." Sarah seemed more shocked by that than by the revelation about David. "What was I supposed to say?" Eleanor finally showed emotion, her voice rising. "That your perfect father, the man you idolized, had a secret son. That he sent money to a woman for years to buy her silence. That every time he went on business trips, I wondered if he was going to see them. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out since we're just getting started. Now continuing. The silence that followed was heavy with decades of unspoken secrets. David was still trying to process everything. He was the son of Arthur Harrison Vance. The man he'd called Mr. Harrison for 20 years was his father. The man whose lawn he mowed, whose rose bushes he pruned, whose flower beds he cleaned. That man was his father. When my mother passed away, David heard his own voice as if from far away. I was 23 years old. It was right after I lost my job in the other city where we lived. There was nothing left keeping me there. I came to New York City to try to start a new life, and 2 weeks after arriving, I got this job here. I figured it was luck. It wasn't luck, Mr. Sterling said gently. Mr. Harrison told me. He knew when Martha got sick, he knew when she passed away. And when you came to New York City, he made sure you'd have a job, here, where he could finally be close to you. But why? David felt tears burning in his eyes. Why didn't he tell me? Why did he pretend all these years? Because he was a coward, Brandon spat out the words. A coward who didn't have the courage to claim his own son, but now wants absolution by leaving half of everything to him, as if money could make up for decades of abandonment. Brandon, Sarah scolded, this isn't David's fault. He didn't know any of this. Didn't he? Brandon turned to his newly discovered brother. Do you really expect me to believe that in 20 years working here, having daily conversations with our father, you never suspected a thing? You never found it strange the way he treated you? David thought. He thought about all the times Mr. Harrison showed up in the garden while he was working. The long conversations about plants, about life, about dreams. The times the boss asked about his day, about his struggles, about his plans. Was there something different about that attention? Something he should have noticed? He was kind, David said finally. Kind in a way I'd never experienced from a boss before, but I thought it was just because he genuinely loved gardens, nature. I never imagined that he was trying to be a father, Sarah finished, her voice soft. Even if it was the only way he allowed himself to be. Eleanor stood up, putting the letter back in her purse. Mr. Sterling, what happens now? The will takes effect immediately. Half of all assets, including company shares, properties, and investments, go to Mr. David Miller. The other half is divided as specified between you and your children. Can he contest that? Brandon asked quickly. You can try, the lawyer replied, but the will is solid, properly registered, and Mr. Harrison was of sound mind when he made it, both 5 years ago and when he revised it. Challenges rarely succeed in cases like this. I don't want to, David said. Everyone turned to him. I don't want to contest it. I don't want any of this. Please, there must be a way to refuse, to give this back to you, his family. You're his family too, Sarah said gently. No, David almost shouted. No, I'm not. Family doesn't abandon. Family doesn't spend 20 years lying, pretending. I don't want anything from a man who was ashamed of me his whole life. He threw the envelope with the letter on the floor and left the office, his footsteps echoing through the mansion's hallway. He passed by the living room with its expensive paintings, by the dining room where he was never allowed to enter, up the marble stairs he cleaned every week, and he went straight to the garden. The garden was the only place in the mansion where he felt like himself. There among the rose bushes he planted, the lawn he leveled with his own hands, the flower beds he designed with care, he was David Miller, gardener. Not a forgotten son, not a hidden shame. Just a man who loved the earth and the plants. He knelt beside the bed of white roses, Mr. Harrison's favorites. No, Arthur's, his father's. David's hands trembled as he touched the delicate petals. How many times had his father stood right there, watching these same roses, while David watered them? How many times had they talked about the best way to prune them, to protect them from the cold? And all along his father knew who he was, but David didn't. David? Sarah's gentle voice came from behind him. He didn't turn around. He didn't want her to see the tears on his face. Please, leave me alone. I can't do that, she said, sitting down on the nearby stone bench. Because you're not alone in this. None of us are. You still have a family, David replied, his voice rough. I don't have anyone. I never have. You do now. You have siblings. You have had a father who loved you, even if in a twisted, painful way. Love? David finally turned to face her. You call that love? Hiding, lying, pretending I didn't exist? I call it fear, Sarah said. Fear of losing everything he built. Fear of disappointing his family. Fear that you would hate him for abandoning you. and maybe, in the end, fear that it was too late to make things right. "Now it's too late," David said, turning his attention back to the roses. "He's gone, and I'm left with questions that will never be answered." Sarah was quiet for a moment, looking at the garden around them. "My father reached out to me 3 months ago," she said at last. "He asked me to come to his office, just the two of us. He had never done that before. It was always work, business, numbers. But that day, he wanted to really talk." David stopped touching the roses, listening. "He told me about you, about your mother, about all the years of living with this secret. And he asked me a question. How does a person fix something that broke so long ago that people don't even remember what it was like when it was whole?" "What did you answer?" David asked, still not looking at her. "That a person needs the courage to try, even knowing it might be too late, even knowing they might be rejected. That forgiveness isn't something you can buy or inherit. It has to be earned." "And what did he say?" That was why he was changing the will. That he knew money didn't make up for everything, but it was the only way he knew to show that you mattered, that you always mattered. David finally turned completely towards Sarah. She was younger than Brandon, probably around 35. He recognized his father's eyes, he realized, the same eyes that had looked at him with kindness when they discussed the garden. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Because he asked something more of me." Sarah took a deep breath. "He asked me to take care of you, to be the sister you never had, and I promised." "You don't have to keep that promise," David said. "I'm not going to stay here. I'm not accepting any of this. I'm leaving, and you can all forget I exist, just like you did all these years." "We didn't do that." Sarah stood up, approaching him. "We didn't know you existed. And now that we do, we can't simply ignore it. You're my brother, David. I didn't choose this situation. You didn't choose it. None of us chose it. But here we are. And we need to decide what to do now." Before David could respond, Eleanor appeared in the garden. She seemed to have aged 10 years since the meeting in the office. Her hands held something David couldn't identify from a distance. "Sarah, can you give us a moment?" Eleanor asked. Sarah looked at David, as if asking for permission. He nodded, and she walked away toward the house, leaving them alone. Eleanor stood still for a long moment, just looking at David. It was the first time in 20 years that they were truly seeing each other. Not mistress and employee, not lady of the house and gardener, but two people connected by the same person who was no longer there. "Arthur always said you had a gift with plants," Eleanor began, "that you made the garden bloom in a way no other gardener ever could. I always thought it was just talk, you know, an employer praising an employee to be polite." "But it wasn't," she continued. "He truly believed it. And now I understand why. He saw you for what you really are, not for what you do." "He never truly saw me," David said, the bitterness clear in his voice. "If he had, he would have told me the truth." "You're right," Eleanor surprised him by agreeing. "He was too much of a coward for that. I told him that many times over the years. After I found out, I pushed him to tell you. But he always had an excuse. 'It's not the right time. I'll wait a little longer. I need to prepare the children first.' Always postponing, always running away." She approached and held out what she was carrying. It was a small wooden box. "He gave this to me a month ago. Said it was for you, but that I should only give it to you afterward. Now I understand why." David hesitated before taking the box. It was old, made of polished mahogany with a brass lock. He opened it slowly. Inside there were photographs, many photographs. The first was of a young, beautiful woman, smiling at the camera. David recognized it immediately. It was his mother, Martha, but younger than he had ever known her. "Keep looking," Eleanor encouraged. The next photo showed the same woman, now with a prominent belly, still smiling but with something different in her eyes. Sadness, fear, love. And then David saw a photo of himself, a baby, no more than a few months old, being held by his mother. But what shocked him was the next photo. The same baby, now in the arms of a young man David only vaguely recognized. It was Arthur, much younger, looking at the child in his arms with an expression of pure love and complete terror. "He knew you," David whispered, the tears finally falling without control. "When I was a baby, he knew me. Once, Eleanor said softly. Martha allowed it once, and he told me, years later, that it was the happiest and saddest day of his life, because he held you and knew he would have to let you go. David kept looking at the photos. There were more, many more. Photos of him as a child, a teenager, a young adult, always from a distance, always furtive, as if taken by someone in hiding, in front of the school, playing ball with friends on graduation day, and in all of them, David could imagine his father there, hidden, watching the life of the son he could never publicly acknowledge. He never stopped following you, Eleanor explained. He had an investigator, someone discreet, who sent reports and photos. Arthur kept everything. He read every report, looked at every photo. He knew about every achievement of yours, every struggle. And he suffered because he couldn't truly be there. If he suffered so much, David said, his voice choked up, why didn't he change that? Why didn't he step forward? Out of cowardice, Eleanor repeated, and out of pride. And because the longer time went on, the harder it became. How do you tell your wife, your children, your business partners that you have a secret son? How do you acknowledge that child without destroying everything you've built? Arthur locked himself in his own lie, and with each passing year the prison grew stronger. Until he couldn't take it anymore, David finished, looking at the last photo in the box. It was recent, of David himself working in the garden, focused on a rose bush. It must have been taken a few months ago. That's why he brought me here to work. That's why the conversations. He was trying the only way he knew how to be my father. Yes, Eleanor confirmed, and I know it wasn't enough. I know 20 years of talking about plants don't make up for a lifetime without a father. But it was the most he could do, and in the end he tried to make up for it the only way he knew, by giving you everything he valued most, his legacy, his fortune, his home. I don't want that, David said, but his voice was less certain now. I know, Eleanor replied. You want a father, and that's the one thing money can't buy back. But accepting the inheritance doesn't mean forgiving him, David. It means accepting that he existed, that you're his son, and that it matters, no matter how complicated it is. David closed the box, holding it against his chest, as if it were the most precious thing in the world, because it was. It was proof that he mattered, that his father, as flawed as he was, loved him, that he wasn't a mistake, an oversight, something to be hidden and forgotten. He was a son. He always had been. What do I do now? He asked, feeling lost in a way he hadn't felt since his mother passed away. Now, Eleanor said, and for the first time, David saw a small smile on her face. You do whatever you want. You're a rich man, David Miller, one of the richest men in the United States. That's the freedom Arthur gave you, the freedom to choose. But freedom, David would discover in the days that followed, came at a high price, and that price would be collected, with interest, by those who felt robbed. The next morning, David woke up in his small room at the back of the property, the same one where he'd slept for 20 years. But when he opened the door, he found Kimberly standing there, an envelope in her hand, and an expression on her face that promised nothing good. Good morning, David, she said, her voice icy. Or should I say, good morning, Mr. Miller. After all, you're practically the owner of this house now. David didn't like her tone. Kimberly, I didn't ask for any of this. You have to believe me. Believe you? She let out a humorless laugh. Why would I believe someone who spent 20 years infiltrating this family, gaining the trust of a vulnerable old man to get his fortune? I didn't know. David felt the anger starting to boil. I found out yesterday, at the same time you all did. Really? Kimberly crossed her arms. Or are you a better actor than we imagined? You know there are ways to contest a will, don't you? Especially when there are suspicions of coercion. Coercion? David almost shouted. The will was made 5 years ago. How could I have coerced anyone 5 years ago when I didn't even know there was a will? That's what you say, Kimberly said, handing him the envelope. But Brandon hired investigators, and they're going to dig into every corner of your life, every conversation you had with Arthur, every moment you two were alone. And if they find anything, any tiny piece of evidence that you knew, that you planned this, we will destroy you in court. David picked up the envelope, his hands trembling with anger and frustration. Investigate all you want. You won't find anything because there's nothing to find." "We'll see." Kimberly turned to leave, but stopped. "Oh, and just so you know, the company staff has already been informed. There's going to be a meeting this afternoon with the shareholders. They're not going to accept a gardener, a nobody, as one of the major owners. Get ready for a battle." She left, leaving David holding the envelope. When he opened it, he found legal documents, subpoenas, veiled threats wrapped in legal jargon. Brandon was serious. He was going to fight. David thought about giving up right then and there, about signing the papers, renouncing the inheritance and going back to his simple life. But then he remembered the photos, the twisted but real love his father had for him, and something inside him, something he didn't know existed, refused to back down. If Arthur had the courage to leave everything to him, even knowing the hell it would cause, then David had to have the courage to accept it, not for the money, but because it was the only way to honor the father he never truly knew. He needed help. He needed someone who understood the laws, the business, the world he was now being forced into, and there was only one person who could help him without ulterior motives. David put on his best clothes, the suit he only wore on special occasions, and went to the mansion's office. Eleanor was there, going through papers, her expression tired but determined. "Eleanor," he said from the doorway, "I need help." She looked up, studying him for a long moment. "I know. And surprisingly, I'm going to help." "Why?" David couldn't hide his surprise. "Why would you help me? I'm the proof of his mistake, of his betrayal." "You're the proof that my husband was human," Eleanor corrected. "Flawed, a coward sometimes, but human. And despite everything, he loved you, David, and I need to respect that, even if it kills me inside." She stood up, grabbing some papers. "Brandon is acting out of anger and wounded pride. Kimberly is acting out of greed disguised as indignation. But Sarah is acting out of love, and I'm going to follow her example, even if it's hard." "What do you suggest I do?" David asked. "First, you need to show up at the shareholders' meeting. Show them you have the right to be there. Second, you need to read the letter Arthur left for you. I briefly saw the full will. There are instructions, advice, things he wanted you to know." I don't know if I can read it," David admitted. "You can, and you will, because if you truly want to accept this inheritance, you need to understand what Arthur expected you to do with it. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and leave a like, and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot who are just starting out. Now continuing. David returned to his room and with trembling hands opened the envelope with his letter. The handwriting was firm, but carried the weight of decades of regret. "My dear David, if you're reading this, then you finally know the truth, and I'm no longer here to see your reaction, to face your anger or your pain. Once again, I'm being a coward, letting words on paper do what I should have done in person. I'm not going to ask for forgiveness because that would be unfair. How can you forgive someone for a lifetime of absence, for 20 years of lies, even if they were lies of omission? I'm not going to insult your intelligence or your pain by asking for something I don't deserve. What I'm going to do is explain, even if the explanation doesn't justify anything. I met your mother when she was 23 years old. Martha was different from every woman I had ever known. She was real, honest, without the social games I was used to. I was engaged to Eleanor, an arranged marriage between families, good for business but without real love. And then I met Martha, and for the first time in my life, I felt what it truly meant to love someone. But I was weak. When she told me about you, when she said she was expecting my child, I panicked. I thought about everything I would lose, the family business that depended on the merger with Eleanor's family, the respect of society, the life I had planned. And I chose all of that over the two of you. I made a deal with Martha. I gave her money, promised support, but I asked her to leave, to raise you far away from me. And she accepted because she had no choice. I had power, money, influence. She only had you. She only. For 23 years, I sent money every month. I hired someone to keep me informed about you. I watched you grow up through photos and reports. I knew when you had the measles at age 4. I knew when you won first prize at the science fair at 12. I knew when you graduated high school with honors. And I suffered for not being there for every moment. When Martha got sick, I tried to intervene. I offered the best doctors, the best treatments, but it was too late. And when she passed, you were left alone and I felt my heart shatter into pieces. That's when I had the idea. I knew you were trying to start over in New York City. I knew you needed a job, so I created a position, an opportunity that seemed casual but that I carefully orchestrated. And you accepted it. You came to work for me, and for the first time in my life, I was able to be close to you. I hadn't planned on just talking about gardens. I hadn't planned on spending hours watching you work, looking for similarities, trying to get to know my son through small pieces. But it happened naturally. You are fascinating, David. Intelligent, dedicated, kind. Everything I could have wished for in a son. Everything I didn't deserve. During these 20 years, I've been at war with myself. Every day was a battle between telling the truth and keeping the lie, between destroying the life I built and finally doing the right thing. And every day, cowardice won. But now, with time running out, I need to make one last attempt to fix what I broke. The money won't bring back the lost years. It won't make you call me father or heal the pain of abandonment. But it will give you freedom. Freedom to choose your life, to pursue your dreams, to never depend on anyone again. The inheritance comes with a condition, not a legal one, but a request from a father to a son. In the mansion, in the gardens you cared for with so much love, there is potential for something greater, something that could help people, educate, preserve the natural beauty that is disappearing from the world. You know what I'm talking about. We talked about it so many times. Do something good with it, David, not for me but for you. Show the world the incredible man you are, the man I helped raise only with money, but whom your mother shaped with love and sacrifice. And if you can, try not to completely hate your memory of me. I know I deserve your hatred, but some part of me, the best part, was always yours, with all the love I never knew how to express. Your father, Arthur. David read the letter 3 times, tears staining the paper. Every word was a knife and a balm at the same time. His father was exactly what he imagined, a weak man who loved selfishly but sincerely. And David didn't know if that made everything better or worse. The shareholders' meeting was a nightmare. David walked into the elegant conference room and felt everyone's eyes on him. Men in expensive suits, women with understated but extremely costly jewelry, all staring at the gardener as if he were a stain on their immaculate clothing. Brandon stood at the center, commanding the room as if he were already the sole owner of the company. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "thank you all for being here in this difficult time. As you know, we lost my father, the founder and president of this company, and now we've discovered that his will contains irregularities." Murmurs rippled through the room. "I want to introduce you to David Miller." Brandon pointed to where David stood by the door. The gardener of the family mansion, and apparently the new owner of half of everything my father built. The way Brandon said gardener made the word sound like an insult. "Brandon," Eleanor interjected, her voice sharp. "Be precise. David isn't just the gardener, he's Arthur's son, and therefore a legitimate heir." The shock in the room was palpable. Chairs scraped against the floor as people turned to get a better look at David. Phones were discreetly pulled from pockets. This news would be in every newspaper by the end of the day. "An illegitimate son," Kimberly added, venomous. "The result of a hidden affair. No involvement with the companies, no business knowledge, no qualifications whatsoever to be here." "And yet," Sarah stood up, positioning herself beside David, "he's here, because our father wanted it that way, and we're going to respect that wish." "You'll respect it," Brandon corrected. "I'm going to fight this with every legal resource available." An older man seated at the head of the table tapped his knuckles on the polished surface, drawing attention. "All this family discussion is very interesting," he said, his voice carrying authority. "But what matters to us, the shareholders, is the stability of the company, and a prolonged legal conflict isn't good for business." He looked directly at David. "Mr. Miller, do you have managerial experience, a business background, any knowledge of how a corporation this size operates?" No, sir, David admitted, his voice steady despite the nervousness. But I'm willing to learn. Discreet laughter echoed through the room. David felt his face grow warm, but he held his ground. Willing to learn, the man repeated. Admirable. But while you learn, who's going to manage your half of the company? Who's going to make the decisions that affect thousands of jobs, multi-million-dollar contracts, crucial investments? I propose, Eleanor said, that David have a transition period, 6 months to learn the business, understand the operations, meet the key executives. During that time, a temporary board can make decisions with majority approval required. And if after 6 months he still isn't ready, another shareholder asked. Then we'll discuss other options, Eleanor replied. But giving him a chance is the least we can do. Arthur built this company from the ground up. If he believed David deserved half of it, then we should at least try to understand why. The debate went on for hours. David stood the entire time, feeling every word as an additional weight on his shoulders. They were discussing his life, his future, as if he weren't even there. And maybe to them he really wasn't. He was just a problem to be solved, an inconvenient variable in the clean equation of corporate succession. When they finally left, it was already night. David went straight to the garden, the only place where he still felt like himself. He found Sarah already there, sitting on the bench where his father used to sit and watch him work. Heavy, wasn't it? She asked. I don't belong in that world, David said, collapsing beside her. They made that very clear. Not yet, Sarah corrected, but you can belong if you want. Dad built everything from scratch too, you know. He came from a middle-class family, you know. He wasn't rich. He built his fortune all on his own. Then why did he become so concerned with status? Why did he choose that instead of accepting his own son? Because he forgot where he came from, Sarah sighed. The more successful he became, the more he believed he needed to keep up appearances, follow the rules of high society. And when he realized he had lost himself, it was already too late to turn back. She looked at David. But you don't have to make the same mistakes. You can use this money, this power, for something different. To be the man Dad should have been. David thought about the words from his father's letter, about doing something good, about the potential of the gardens. He mentioned something in the letter, David said, about turning this place into something that could help people, educate, preserve. He talked about that with me, too. Sarah smiled. In the last few months, it was almost an obsession. A botanical garden, maybe a research center, something that combined nature and education. He believed you could make that happen. But I don't know where to start, David admitted. I don't know how to deal with those businessmen, with lawyers, with all that bureaucracy. Then learn, Sarah said, her voice gentle but firm. And let me help. Not out of pity, not out of obligation, but because I believe Dad was right. You can do something incredible here. In the following days, David found himself torn between two worlds. In the mornings, he went to meetings at the company, trying to understand financial reports, market strategies, corporate structures. It was like learning a new language, and he felt lost most of the time. Brandon took every opportunity to humiliate him, asking technical questions he knew David couldn't answer, using deliberately complex jargon, treating him like a child getting in the way of the adults. But in the afternoons, David went back to the garden. And there, with his hands in the soil, he planned the botanical garden his father had dreamed of. He planned how each area could be used, which plants would be cultivated, what the educational structure would look like. And in those moments he felt connected to his father in a way he never had while the man was alive. One afternoon, while sketching out what the main greenhouse would look like, David heard footsteps behind him. It was Mrs. Higgins, the oldest housekeeper in the house, working there for nearly 30 years. "Can I talk to you?" she asked, her voice hesitant. "Of course, Mrs. Higgins." She sat down on the bench with difficulty, her aging legs complaining. "I knew your mother," she said, and David froze. "How?" "Before I started working here, I worked at Mr. Harrison's first company. I was a cleaner there. Martha worked there too. In the administrative department, we became friends." David set down the sketch, all his attention now on Mrs. Higgins. She told me about Mr. Harrison, about their affair. I was there when she found out she was pregnant, when she cried in the bathroom because she didn't know what to do. And I was there when he made the offer, when he offered the money in exchange for her silence. Did she accept right away? David needed to know. No, Mrs. Higgins shook her head. She tried to fight, said she would tell everyone, that she didn't care about the scandal. But he had lawyers, resources. He threatened to prove she was unstable, that she had seduced her boss, that she wasn't fit to raise a child. Martha was alone, with no family, no money for lawyers. She didn't really have a choice. David felt the anger rising again, anger at the father he never knew, but also couldn't completely hate anymore. But she loved him, Mrs. Higgins continued. Even after everything, even living in another city, she still loved him. She kept newspaper clippings about him, about the company. And when you were born, David, she looked at you and saw the man she loved. I don't know if that tortured her or comforted her. Why are you telling me this now? David asked. Because you need to know that Mr. Harrison wasn't the only one who suffered because of this situation. Your mother suffered far more. She lived in poverty when she could have had a comfortable life. She raised you on her own, working 2 jobs at times, so you would never go without. And she died without the man she loved ever publicly acknowledging the son they had together. Mrs. Higgins took David's hand. Use that money to honor her, not him. Do something your mother would be proud of, not something to impress those rich people who look at you like you're beneath them. Those words stayed with David. He was so preoccupied with understanding his father, with honoring the wishes of a man he barely knew, that he was forgetting the woman who actually raised him, Martha Miller, who worked herself to the bone to give him a good education, who never complained, never spoke ill of his absent father, just loved her son with everything she had. It was that memory that strengthened him when Brandon finally made his hardest move. 3 weeks after the reading of the will, Brandon called an emergency board meeting. David arrived to find the room full of lawyers, all with serious expressions. I present, Brandon said with a triumphant smile, evidence that my father's will was drafted under emotional coercion and psychological manipulation. I have recordings of conversations between my father and David that make clear an inappropriate relationship, taking advantage of a sick man's vulnerability. He played an audio clip. It was Arthur's voice, weak but recognizable, talking with David. You're the best thing that ever happened to this house, David. The only one who truly understands what matters. Thank you, Mr. Harrison. You're very kind. I'm not kind. I'm honest. And I'm going to make sure you're recognized for what you're worth. You'll see. The audio ended. Brandon looked around the room. Is it clear? He was being manipulated, led to believe that only David valued him, creating an emotional dependency that resulted in an absurd will. This is ridiculous, Sarah stood up. Those are normal conversations between an employer and a dedicated employee. There's nothing manipulative about that. To you, who's always been naive, Brandon shot back, but to any sensible person it's clear something sinister was going on. David finally found his voice. You recorded your own father? He asked, his voice trembling with anger. You planted hidden microphones to spy on his private conversations? I was worried about him. Brandon defended himself. I noticed changes in his behavior. Him spending too much time with you. I was trying to protect him from someone who clearly had ulterior motives. I didn't have ulterior motives. David slammed his fist on the table. I didn't even know there was a will. And those recordings prove it. Listen again. I'm thanking him the way any employee would thank a compliment. There's no conspiracy there. The lawyers exchanged glances. One of them, a middle-aged woman with thin-rimmed glasses, picked up the audio and listened again more carefully. Mr. Harrison, she said to Brandon, with all due respect, I don't see evidence of manipulation here. I see a conversation between 2 people who clearly had a good relationship. If that's the best you've got, it won't hold up in court. But there's more, Brandon insisted, his confidence wavering. I have witnesses who saw suspicious conversations, strange behavior. Strange behavior like a father trying to connect with the son he abandoned, Sarah challenged. Or do you mean strange behaviors like a businessman recognizing the value of someone who worked faithfully for him for 20 years? The argument continued, but David already knew the outcome. Brandon was trying to build a case out of nothing, driven by anger and denial. The recordings, instead of harming David, actually showed the genuine relationship between father and son, even though neither of them knew it at the time. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and leave a like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. But what the recordings revealed to David was something deeper and more painful. His father knew he was sick. He knew time was running out, and he was trying, in a clumsy and belated way, to show some affection, to give some indication of what he felt. And David, not knowing the truth, had accepted those moments for what they seemed to be. Kindness from a boss to a devoted employee. How many missed opportunities were in those recordings? How many times did his father try to say something more, but didn't have the courage? How many times could David have asked a different question, started a deeper conversation, and maybe discovered the truth while there was still time? That realization consumed him in the following days. He listened to the recordings repeatedly, all of them that Brandon had collected before giving up on using them as evidence, and in each one he saw the same things. A man trying to be a father without being able to use the word, and a son responding with genuine respect and affection, not knowing he was talking to his own father. It was during one of those sessions of self-torture that David found something strange. In one of the recordings, there was a conversation that seemed to be cut off. Arthur's voice began in the middle of a sentence. "I can't live like this anymore. He needs to know. David needs to know the truth." A female voice responded, and David recognized it. It was Eleanor. "Arthur, we've already discussed this. If you tell him now, it will destroy everything. Brandon will lose it, the companies will suffer, and worse, David might hate you for lying all these years. He already has every right to hate me. I deserve his hatred." "Maybe, but why cause more pain? You're giving him the inheritance. Isn't that enough?" "Money doesn't replace a father, Eleanor. You've always told me that yourself." A silence, then Eleanor's voice, softer. "Then tell him. But do it the right way. Prepare him. Prepare the kids. Don't drop that bomb on everyone at once." "I want to do it, but I'm afraid." "Of what?" "That he'll look me in the eyes and ask me why I waited so long. And I won't have a good answer, Eleanor, because there is no good answer for 45 years of abandonment." The recording ended there. David played it several times, trying to extract more meaning from every word. His father wanted to tell him, he was planning to tell him, but time ran out before he found the courage. David took the recording to Eleanor. "You knew he was planning to tell me?" he asked. Eleanor looked at the device with a tired expression. "Yes. He had decided to do it on his birthday, next month. He was going to gather the whole family, have a special dinner, and then tell everything. But then Time ran out faster than we expected." "Why didn't you tell me this?" "Because it wouldn't have changed anything," Eleanor replied. "He died before he could do what he planned. Knowing he wanted to doesn't make the fact that he didn't any less painful." "It does for me," David said. "It makes it less painful to know he was trying, that at least in the end he was trying to do the right thing." Eleanor watched David for a long moment. "You're going to forgive him, aren't you?" she asked. "Even after everything, you're going to find a way to forgive him?" David thought about the question. "I don't know if it's forgiveness," he said finally. "It's more acceptance. Accepting that he was flawed, that he made mistakes, but that in the end, he tried to make things right the only way he knew how. And accepting that I'll never have the answers I want, that I'll never have the father-son relationship I should have had, but I can honor his memory by doing something good with what he left behind." "The botanical garden?" Eleanor asked. "Yes, and more. I've been researching, talking to Sarah about the possibilities. There's so much we could do with this place, with this money. Not just a garden, but an educational center, programs for young people from underserved communities to learn about botany, sustainable agriculture, environmental preservation. My mother always said that education was the only thing that saved us from poverty. I want to give that to other people." Eleanor smiled, and it was the first time David had seen a genuine smile on her face. "Arthur would be proud," she said. Not of the wealthy businessman, but of the man he was before he forgot what truly mattered. The plans began to take shape. With Sarah's help, who knew the administrative side of business, and surprisingly with the quiet support of Eleanor, who had her own contacts and influence, David began turning the vision into reality. The first change was practical. Part of the mansion was converted into offices for the new foundation. Areas of the garden were designated for different educational purposes. Architects and landscapers were hired to create a coherent plan that respected the natural beauty of the place while making it accessible and functional for visitors. Brandon opposed every step, every decision, every expense. He saw the project as a waste, a vanity project by someone who didn't know what he was doing. And in many tense meetings, he made his objections clear. "You're destroying our father's legacy," he accused during a particularly heated meeting. "Turning the family home into a public park. It's humiliating." "What's humiliating is having a mansion this size just for show," David shot back. "Your father wanted this to serve something greater, and I'm going to make that happen, with or without your approval." "You don't have the experience or the knowledge to manage a project this size," Brandon insisted. "You'll fail spectacularly and drag the family name down with you." "Then help me," David said, surprising everyone in the room, including Brandon. "If you truly care about your father's legacy, about the family's reputation, then use your knowledge to make sure the project succeeds. Don't sabotage it. Contribute." Brandon was speechless for a moment. No one expected David to make that appeal. Kimberly, sitting beside her husband, whispered something in his ear, but he ignored her. "Why would I help you?" Brandon finally asked. "Because it's not about me. It's about him." David pointed to a portrait of Arthur on the wall. "It's about honoring who he really was, not who he pretended to be. And because, whether you accept it or not, we're brothers. Half the same blood, raised in different worlds, but connected by the same person who gave us life." Brandon looked at his father's portrait for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was different, softer, vulnerable. "I never had with him what you had," he admitted. "Even living in the same house, even working at the same company, I never felt like my father truly saw me. He was always distant, always focused on business, on keeping up appearances. And then I find out that with you, with the gardener, he was different. He was real, he was present. How is that fair?" David understood then that Brandon's anger didn't come just from the inheritance. He had spent years feeling insufficient, never good enough, always competing for the attention of a father who was emotionally unavailable because he was obsessed with the son he could not acknowledge. "It's not fair," David said gently. "Nothing about this situation is fair. You were robbed of a present father just as much as I was robbed of a father entirely. Arthur failed both of us, just in different ways." Sarah, who had been watching the exchange in silence, approached Brandon and placed her hand on his shoulder. "Maybe the best way to honor Dad is to learn from his mistakes," she said. "Not to repeat the same failures. Not to let pride and fear destroy what's left of the family." Brandon stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the garden where David still worked some mornings, keeping alive the connection to the land that had always defined him. "Fine," he said finally. "Fine, I'll help. But not because I've forgiven you or Dad. Because maybe, just maybe, this is what we all need to start healing." It was a fragile beginning, a delicate truce, but it was something. And David had learned to value small progress on a path he knew would be long and difficult. The following months were intense. David divided his time between learning about the corporate business and developing the garden project. Brandon, keeping his word, helped with the administrative and financial side, though his interactions with David remained tense and formal. It was during that period that something unexpected happened. David was in the office late at night, reviewing architectural plans, when he heard someone come in. It was Kimberly. "Can I talk to you?" she asked, her tone a far cry from the initial hostility. "Of course," David replied, surprised. She sat down, looking uncomfortable. "I want to apologize," she began. "For the way I treated you, for the accusations, the hostility, I was wrong." David hadn't expected that. "What changed?" "Brandon," she said. "He changed. Working with you on this project, I see him more relaxed, more present with our children, more like the person he was when we first met. And I realized that the anger he was carrying was consuming not just him, but our whole family." She took something out of her bag, an old photograph. "I found this in Arthur's office while helping Eleanor organize some things. It's you, as a baby, with your mother. And on the back there's a note." David took the photo and turned it over. The handwriting was his father's. "Martha and David, 1980. My secret family, my greatest regret, and my deepest love." "He loved us," Kimberly said. "He loved imperfectly, cowardly, but he loved. And carrying that guilt all these years must have been his own prison. I can't keep being part of perpetuating more pain when he clearly wanted to heal what he broke." David felt the familiar burn of tears. "Thank you," he said simply. "No," Kimberly corrected. "Thank you for not giving up when it would have been easier, for fighting to create something good out of something painful. You're doing what Arthur should have done, turning mistakes into opportunities." The transformation of the mansion continued. While areas were being renovated and the garden expanded, David implemented the first phase of the educational program. Local schools were invited for visits, botany students received scholarships, workshops on sustainability began to be offered for free. And with each activity, David felt a growing connection not only to his father's memory, but to his mother's. Every young person from a poor family who received an opportunity, every child who discovered a love for nature, every person who found hope and knowledge there, was a tribute to Martha Miller, who sacrificed everything to give her son the chance to be more than his circumstances dictated. Mrs. Higgins became a constant presence in the project, now officially as a historical consultant, sharing stories about the early days of the company, about Martha, about a young Arthur who still hadn't forgotten where he came from. Her perspective helped David understand not just his father, but the entire journey that led to that moment. One afternoon, as David showed the progress of the botanical garden to a group of students, he noticed an elderly woman watching from a distance. There was something familiar about her features, even though he was certain he had never seen her before. When the students left, the woman approached. "David Miller?" she asked. "Yes. Can I help you?" "My name is Beatrice Miller," she said, and David felt his heart tighten. "Miller. I'm your mother's sister, Martha's sister, your aunt." David was speechless. He had always known his mother had an older sister, but they had drifted apart years ago before he was born. He had never met her. How did you find me?" "I read about you in the newspapers," Beatrice explained, "about the inheritance, about you being Arthur Harrison Vance's son, and I realized I had to come. I had to meet my sister's son, even if it took this long." "Why did you two drift apart?" David asked the question he had always wanted to ask his mother, but never had the courage to. "Because of Arthur," Beatrice admitted. "When Martha told me about the pregnancy, about the arrangement with him, I judged her harshly. I thought she was selling her son, taking money to cover up a scandal. I said terrible things, things I can't take back. And she pulled away from me because I couldn't see that she had no real choice." Beatrice's voice trembled. "All these years I've thought about her. I wanted to reach out so many times, but pride, the shame of what I said, always held me back. And then I found out she was already gone, and it was too late to ask for forgiveness." David saw his own pain reflected in Beatrice's eyes. Another person carrying the weight of unspoken words, of reconciliations put off until it was too late. "She talked about you," David said gently. "Not much and always with sadness, but she did. She missed you." Beatrice began to cry, and David, moved by an instinct he didn't know he had, embraced her. This woman, this stranger who was his family, who carried the same last name as his mother, who had the same gentle eyes. "Tell me about her," Beatrice asked, once she had composed herself. "Tell me about the sister I lost." about the kind of mother she was, about the kind of woman she became. And David told her. He told her about the nights his mother worked late but always found the energy to help him with his homework, about how she sang while she cooked, always the same old songs, about how she kept every drawing he made, every report card, every small achievement as if they were treasures. He told her about how she would wait by the window when he came home late, no matter how tired she was, about how she saved for years to buy the bicycle he wanted for his 15th birthday, about how she never complained, never spoke ill of anyone, just loved with a quiet fierceness that David only fully understood after she was gone. And as he spoke, David realized he was finally getting to know his mother in a new way, through his own adult eyes, no longer the view of a child who took her for granted. She was a survivor, a warrior, a woman who chose to love in impossible circumstances and never let bitterness poison that choice. Beatrice shared her own memories of Martha as a child, full of dreams and hopes, before life made her more cautious, more weary. And together, aunt and nephew, they built a complete picture of a woman who deserved to be remembered, not for the tragedy of her life, but for the strength of her character. "There's something you need to know," Beatrice said, her voice serious. "Your mother wasn't fully honest with you about one thing." David felt a knot in his stomach. "What?" "The money Arthur used to send. Martha didn't spend it all. She saved it. For years, she saved every penny she could. And when she found out she was getting sick, she put it all into an account in your name. Not much by Arthur's standards, but enough for you to have started a decent life." "But I never received any money," David said, confused, "because she asked her lawyer to only release it when you turned 30. She wanted you to have the maturity to use it well." The lawyer must have tried to contact you, David thought. He remembered letters from a law firm he'd received a few years back, but he was going through a rough patch, changing jobs, and ended up ignoring them, thinking they were unimportant. "How much?" he asked. "I don't know exactly, but Martha mentioned it to me once, shortly before we drifted apart completely, that she wanted to save up enough money for you to go to college. Knowing how determined she was, it must be a considerable amount." David decided to investigate. He contacted law firms, searched for his mother's lawyer's name, and finally found it. The account existed. And Beatrice was right. His mother had saved the equivalent of 4 years at a private university, plus an additional amount to start a stable life. Looking at the documents, David cried. His mother had given up any comfort, any luxury, saving money that could have improved her own life, all to ensure he had opportunities she never had. And he never even knew, never got to thank her. But now he knew what to do with that money. He would use it to start a scholarship fund in Martha Miller's name, for young people from low-income families interested in environmental sciences. It would be the beginning of something that would truly honor his greatest hero. Not the rich father who abandoned him, but the poor mother who never left him. The inauguration of the Arthur Harrison Vance Botanical Garden and Educational Center was scheduled for 6 months after the reading of the will. 6 months of intense work, arguments, reconciliations, painful discoveries, and slow healing. The night before the inauguration, David walked alone through the garden. The new areas were immaculate, every plant in place, every path carefully designed. But it was the old garden, the one he had tended for 20 years, that called to him. He knelt beside the bed of white roses, his father's favorites. He touched the petals delicately. "I hope you're proud," he whispered into the air. "I know I'm not the son you imagined. I'm not a businessman. I have no interest in corporations and profits. But I'm trying to honor what you wanted in my own way." He would be... Eleanor's voice came from behind him. "I have no doubt about that." David turned around. Eleanor rarely came to the garden, preferring the elegant interiors of the mansion. Seeing her there, in a simple dress and without the armor of jewelry and heavy makeup, was unusual. "Tomorrow everything changes," she said, looking around. "This place stops being ours and becomes everyone's. It's strange, but also right." "Will you miss it?" David asked. "The mansion?" "No," Eleanor surprised him. "I'll miss the illusion that we were a perfect family. But that illusion died the same day Arthur did. And maybe that's for the best. Maybe it's time for all of us to live in truths, not carefully constructed fantasies. She sat on the bench, gesturing for David to join her. "There's something I never told you," she began. "Something Arthur did that you deserve to know." David waited, his heart racing. "When your mother fell ill, Arthur wanted to go see her. He wanted to be there, to help, to do something, but she refused. She sent a message through the lawyer saying she didn't want to see him, that it was too late, that he had made his choice decades ago, and she had learned to live with the consequences." Eleanor paused. That rejection broke something in him. He realized that some things truly cannot be fixed with money or belated regrets. That he had lost not only you, but Martha too, and this time it was irreversible. It was after that that he began to change, to try to be different, to plan how to make amends in the only way that remained, through you. "My mother loved him," David said. "Mrs. Higgins told me." Beatrice confirmed it. "So why did she refuse to see him?" "See, because she had pride too," Eleanor answered. "And because maybe she knew that seeing him so late would only bring more pain. Sometimes kindness lies in letting go, not in clinging to something that died long ago." David thought about that. He thought about all the choices made, all the missed opportunities, all the words left unspoken that had led to this moment, and he realized he wasn't just carrying his father's story, but his mother's as well. They both loved, they both suffered, they both failed, and they both tried, each in their own way, to do the best they could with the impossible choices they faced. "Tomorrow," David said, "there will be 2 plaques at the entrance, one with Arthur's name, as planned, and another with the name Martha Miller, my mother, who made it possible for me to be here." Eleanor smiled, and it was a sad but genuine smile. He would have liked that, knowing she's being honored. Maybe he would even have made peace with his own regret, knowing that at least in some way they are together. End of the story. And now, dear listener, tell us in the comments, what did you think of David's story? Would you have accepted the inheritance in his place? Have you ever been through something similar in your family? Leave your honest words in the comments. We really want to read your opinion. And don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other emotional stories we've prepared for you. Your presence here means so much to us. Thank you very much.